Good day, everyone. I want to share my story with my family, which happened in 2016. The story is real, not fictional. Before writing this story, I checked with my sister and mother how everything really happened. I don't know if this story is scary or not. Decide for yourself. So, it happened in the summer of 2016. That day, I was sitting in the apartment with my friends. We drank all night long. I am not a fan of alcoholic beverages. I drank only for companionship. It was 7 or 8 in the morning when my sister called me, crying hysterically, saying that my brother had hanged himself in the shower. We have a private house. My brother is a year older than me. I was shocked. I couldn't understand anything. I said, "I'll come home now." I flew out of the apartment like a bullet, somehow got into a taxi and went home. There is some confusion in my head. It's still at a low point. I came home. Everyone in the house was in shock, hysterical. My mother was crying. I went to the shower, looked, my brother was hanging from his own belt there. I have zero emotions. Because of the shock, everything is burning inside, but I can't cry. We were asked not to touch the body until the police arrived. Some time passed, and we started to prepare for the funeral. Suddenly, my other brother says, "I told you yesterday that a man in black followed me at night." I shivered and got scared at these words and started to ask him what happened and how it happened. Beyond the brother's words. It was about 12 at night. I was in the city center, and I got into a taxi when I was about to go home. Suddenly, a man jumped out from nowhere and sat in the back seat of a parallel parked car. I looked at this car. A man in black was sitting there, and he was looking at me too. I thought, maybe he is a friend of the driver of this car, and I didn't pay attention. I noticed that he was looking at me intently from the corner of my eye. I looked at him a few times and noticed that he was smiling. After taking a taxi to the stop in the area where he was, he got out of the car and walked to his house. Suddenly I turn around and a black man is following me. I turned around a few times and he continued to follow me. When I got home, he stopped 20 meters away from the house. I asked him what he needed. Maybe he was looking for someone, but he did not answer. Then I went home, had dinner, and went out to the garden to smoke. I sit down, smoke, and suddenly I noticed this man sitting on the courts near the fence gate. I started asking, "Who are you? Who are you? Who are you looking for?" No answer, no hello, only a smile in response. When I asked him something, he just smiled. I invited him to come home and talk, but he sat down and didn't move. Later, I went home and told everyone that a man sitting by the fence in the garden had followed me from the city center, but no one paid attention to my words. They probably thought it was some kind of drunkenness. After a while, the man in black entered the house. I saw him walking down the hallway. I told everyone and asked what kind of person was walking around our house. Who was he? According to the brother's story, this man in black was tall and had a hat on his head. My brother, who hung himself, left the house at around 3 to 4 o'clock that night. My sister couldn't sleep that night either. She was playing with her phone. She knew that her brother had left the house. She looked out the window a few times, got worried, wondered where he could go at such a time, and went to bed. At 7 in the morning, our neighbors who rented a house in our garden found my brother hanged. This is our story. When my brother saw this man, he is shy and serious. It's hard to make him laugh. He can't invent all this. I believed him right away. But the second brother who hanged himself is cheerful and sociable in life, can invent a story for fun and blurt it out. In general, I don't know who this man in black is, and why no one saw him except his brother, and why another brother hanged himself and not the one who saw him. All this unsolved nightmare is still in my head. After the story of the brother, the sister began to blame him for bringing this evil spirit into the house. Unfortunately, this brother died of a heart attack in 2018. I have everything. Sorry if the story is not clear to you, but I tried. The events are real. They happened to me personally around 1998. I was 15 years old then, but I still remember the horror that I experienced then. And probably I will remember it for the rest of my life. At that time, we lived in a small 2-story house for 5 families built next to a small railway siding. In Soviet times, my parents worked as railway workers, and they were settled in this house so that it would be closer for them to get to work. The house was built before the war, miraculously survived, and our apartment on the second floor looked like a fortress, 3-meter ceilings, thick brick walls. In the early 90s, when times were turbulent and outright robberies often occurred on the railway, my parents ordered and installed powerful iron doors and iron bars on the windows, which later saved my life. It was a late spring evening. It had been dark for a long time. My parents had gone to visit relatives in the neighboring city, and I had successfully gotten away with it, citing lessons. I was lying all alone in the apartment, as it turned out later, in the whole house, and watching something neutral on TV. And then there was a knock on the door. They didn't ring the bell, although the doorbell was working, but they knocked. And the sound was as if they were knocking with a large wooden hammer or a huge fist. This sound in the middle of the night, to put it mildly, did not please me and did not bode well for me. To be honest, I was very scared. Not of bandits, zombies, or anything else in particular, but simply scared. The fear originated somewhere in the vertebrae of my neck, slid down my spine to my stomach. My arms did not obey me, and my legs became weak. It is difficult to describe, but I somehow knew that I was finished, absolutely certain, and without options. The knocks on the door stopped. The horror loosened its grip a little, and I was able to find the strength to go to the door and look through the peephole. What I saw there, I still cannot understand and comprehend. Behind the door stood a non-human. It was a creature, larger than any man I had ever seen. It was wrapped from head to toe in some kind of dark canvas raincoat, clearly not new and dusty, as if this raincoat had been lying in the attic for 10 years, and then put on without bothering to brush off the dust and cobwebs. On the head of the knocker was a huge hood, part of the raincoat, because of which the face was not visible, but I was sure that the visitor was looking straight through the peephole and knew that I was looking at him. We stood and silently looked at the door, each from our own side. I was shaking slightly, and the creature in the canvas raincoat did not show any signs of life. I did not make a sound, tried not to breathe. There were no thoughts in my head, no panic, just a feeling of all-consuming horror and hopelessness. The reason for this was not only the appearance of my guest, but also the way he breathed. A person cannot breathe like that. Neither a drunk, nor out of breath after running, nor a person hiding, and he did not even think of hiding, is physically capable of breathing like that. And then the creature behind the door raised its huge hand in a smooth, jerking motion and slammed its fist in a canvas glove, like the cloak, into the armored door of my apartment. It moved like a drunken robot or a monster from a cheap computer game. unnatural, but terrifying. It hit again and again. It seemed completely unfazed by the fact that the door was not giving in. It was ready to pound on it as much as necessary. I stood half a meter from the door and listened to the rhythmic knocks on the door. I was afraid. I was afraid not that the door would give in. I was afraid not of death, but of the one knocking on the door. I was afraid not that it would kill me. I was afraid that such a thing could exist at all. Soon, the ability to think returned to me. At first, I thought that the neighbors would hear and come to the rescue, since these blows could be heard throughout the entire building. But then I remembered that they were starting to resettle the house, since it was subject to demolition, and at the moment only 2 families lived there. Ours and another one on the first floor. They were probably not at home, or they did not dare to go out. My second thought was to call. I even ran up and picked up the phone, but there was no dial tone. I had only heard about mobile phones at that time, and of course I did not have one. The thought of jumping out the window did not even occur to me then, because probably the instinct of self-preservation blocked even the thought of leaving a safe shelter and meeting this hellish creature on the street. And the monster behind the door continued to knock on the door with his fist, monotonously, senselessly, and silently. I also did not utter a word, quietly returned and sat down on my bed. I listened to these blows and fell asleep a few hours later. It seems unreal and illogical, but the body, exhausted by the horror experienced, simply switched off. When I woke up, it was morning outside the window. No one else knocked on the door, but I hesitated for a long time to go out and check, or even look through the peephole. I lay there and listened, but I could hear nothing but the noise of the railroad outside the window. Then I finally plucked up some courage, tiptoed to the phone. It was working. I immediately called my parents and asked them to come home as soon as possible. I tried to tell my parents honestly about what had happened. They decided that it was just a big drunk bandit who had come to visit, who seemed too scary to me in the dark. I didn't argue, because I knew in my mind that I was saying unrealistic things, and I myself would never have believed my own nonsense if someone had told me this. The dents on the door showed that I hadn't made up the story entirely, and my parents had taken the trouble to file a police report about an armed robbery of the apartment. That was the end of it. At least I have been hoping for many years that it has ended.